Hi, this is Laura from Black Crow Knits. Today I'm going to show you how to do the Italian cast on. Sometimes people refer to it as the tubular cast on, where an actual tubular cast on is done a little bit differently, but the end result is the same. There's this beautiful wrap around between the right side and the wrong side. It's a reversible cast on, so the knits seem to roll over onto the other side, as do the pearls. So you can see it on in the tranquil hat and also the big loopy hat. Here's the purl row, or knit row, you can see this more clearly, rolls right around onto the other side. So it's a lot of structure, it's got some stretch, but it's also it's really attractive. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. We start like a long tail cast on, which is to say you need a long tail. I'm going to cast on about 20 stitches. Tail yarn is towards me, working yarn is away. So the hand position is exactly like a long tail cast on. So the first stitch, some people start their tubular or Italian cast on with the purl and then do a knit. In this particular instance, I'm going to start with a knit stitch. You can also make your first stitch a slip knot, but I don't find that's necessary. So this cast on has 3 steps. There's the cast on, and then there's 2 setup rows, which I'm going to show you how to do. So for the first stitch, the needle comes up and under, and then you can just take hold of it with your thumb to keep it in place. This is going to be your knit stitch eventually. The next one will be a purl, since we're working in ribbing. To make your purl, you're going to come over the yarn on the finger, up in the middle, around the yarn on the thumb, and make a little twist. And you can see that looks a little bit like a purl bump. The knit stitch is the exact opposite. We're going to come around the yarn on the thumb, up in the middle, over the yarn on the finger, and there's your knit. So for the purl, over the yarn on the finger, up in the middle, around the yarn on the thumb, and there's your purl. So now we've got 4 stitches. So I'll do that one more time, and I'm going to go a little bit more slowly. Under the yarn on the thumb, up into the middle, around the yarn on the finger, come all the way back, and there's your knit. We're going to go over the yarn on the finger, up into the middle, under the yarn on the thumb, there's your purl. So now we've got 6 stitches. I'm going to cast on 20, so I'm just going to keep going, talking as I go. Under the thumb, over the finger, and under. Over the yarn on the finger, into the middle, over the yarn on the thumb, there's your purl. Under the thumb, over the finger, there's your knit. Over the yarn on the finger, into the middle, over the yarn on the thumb, there's your purl. Thumb, finger, under. Finger, thumb, under. Thumb, finger, under. Finger, thumb, under. Thumb, finger, under. Finger, thumb, under. So you just keep going in that way. It gets easier. You're creating a bit of a rocking motion with your hands. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. I'm going to do 4 more. Thumb, finger, under. That's your knit. Finger, middle, thumb, under. Under the thumb, into the middle, over the finger. Over the finger, under the thumb, and there we go. So I took a little bit too much extra with the working yarn, for the tail yarn. So now we're going to turn. You're going to have to hang on to this last stitch because you can see it's quite loose. So turn your work. Now this stitch, which will be a knit stitch because the last stitch was a purl, we've turned it. You're going to need to secure it in place. So we wrap that yarn. Wrap that last stitch a couple times to kind of hitch it in place. Now make sure you're starting with the working yarn. Okay, so this first stitch is a knit stitch, and you can see it's twisted on the needle. So rather than knitting into the front of the stitch like you normally would, you're going to knit into the back of the stitch. Knit that first stitch. And then just give your tail yarn a bit of a tug so you can secure the stitch. Take the yarn to the front, slip that next stitch purlwise, and then yarn comes to the back. knit into the back of the loop, yarn forward, slip the next stitch, which is a purl, yarn goes back, knit into the back, yarn forward, slip purlwise, yarn goes back, knit, yarn forward, slip, yarn back. You can see the stitches get a little twisted on the needles, which is okay, because as you encounter the stitches, you can clearly see which is what. That's a knit. Knit into the back, yarn forward, here's your purl, slip it, yarn back, knit, slip, knit, yarn forward, slip, yarn back, knit into the back, yarn forward, slip purlwise, yarn back, knit into the back, yarn forward, slip. So you come to the last two stitches and they're a little bit funkier. So the trick here is to knit this second to last stitch through the back loop, yarn forward as if to slip, but instead of coming in through the front, I come in through the back. I still slip it, but it twists that stitch a little bit, so it's not so baggy or gappy or loose. Turn your work, one more setup row to work before we're ready to begin. So here we go. This first stitch, because we slipped it purlwise, is going to be a knit, but it's oriented correctly on the needles. So you're just going to knit it as you would normally into the front of the loop. And as before, yarn forward, slip, yarn back, knit, yarn forward, slip, yarn back. I'll try to do that continental style. I'm not very good at this, but we'll give it a go. Knit, yarn forward, slip, yarn back, knit, yarn forward, slip, yarn back, knit, yarn forward, slip, yarn back, knit. So I'll switch back as I'm more comfortable as a thrower. Knit, purl, oops. See, I got into the cadence of knitting. It's actually knit, slip, knit, yarn forward, slip, yarn back, knit, yarn forward, slip, knit. Here's your last stitch, yarn forward, and then slip. Turn your work. So if you were knitting flat, you could now continue knitting, well actually ribbing, knit, purl. You would work the stitches as you see them. You can already see that the stitches are starting to wrap nicely. You can actually see that tubular cast on starting to form. But if you're working in the round, as you would be for a hat or a cuff or a top of a sock, you're going to want to, now you're going to want to start working in the round, but being careful not to twist your stitches. So I'm going to just do magic loop. Again, be careful not to use the tail yarn. It's easy to do that. So here we go. The first stitch is a knit stitch. Now make sure you pull this first stitch a little bit snug so that you can help to close up the gap. And then we'll purl and knit and purl and so on until you come to the beginning of the row. So I'm just going to continue to work around, and I'll join you again once I finish this round. Okay, so now I've come to the start of that first row at the join. This is the last couple stitches, knit, purl. And what I wanted to point out here is that there's a bit of a jog, and it's a bit gappy. So there is a technique to close that jog later as you have finished working through your ribbing. So you would just continue working and ribbing as normal, as directed. But as you can see, there is a little bit of a jog here. So I'm going to show you how to close that gap. So here is a different little sample that I knit up to show you how to close up this jog. But you can see this is the tubular cast on, or the Italian cast on, and it's got this lovely wrap around the edge. It's got some nice stretch. You can imagine this would be a good cuff. Okay, so to close this gap, what you can see, here is a run of knit stitches, here's another run of knit stitches, here's the purls. But there's a bit of a gap. So to close it, you will thread your tail yarn onto a tapestry needle. And then just look and see where is a logical place to graft these two together. I can see there's a little bit of a bump here, so I'm going to bring my yarn up into this bump. And then I'm going to bring it back down into the bump that I started, like that. And then now you can see that that jog is closed quite nicely. And then you just sew your ends in. There you go. So that is my little lesson today on working the Italian cast on. I hope you find it helpful. Thank you.